Cloudcast Media.
Drew Schlosberg Spotlight on the Community Show, amplifying the voices of social impact organizations, entrepreneurs, local nonprofits, and other community champions who shape the culture, creativity, and connectivity of San Diego. Brought to you by Mission Fed Credit Union, bringing good things to San Diego for over 60 years. Learn more about what is good for you and good for all by visiting www.missionfed.com.
I'm Drew Schlosberg of Cloudcast Media. You're listening to another edition of the Drew Schlosberg Spotlight on the Community Show, brought to you by Mission Fed Credit Union. So happy to have in the studio with us today Liz Bowie. She is the CEO of Yulex Brands Corporation. How are you doing there, Liz? Good?
Great. Thanks, Drew. And yourself?
I'm doing just fine over here in a nice little bit of a rainy day here in San Diego. We do need the rain. Joined by my very frequent co-host and the senior associate producer of Cloudcast Media, Brandon Joe. I'll start with you right out of the gate over here, Liz. What is the mission of Yulex?
Oh, the mission is pretty simple. Ever since really from the inception, our mission is we're a material science company, innovating plant-based natural rubber materials to replace petroleum-based materials. And replace, not in addition to, replace. So for example, neoprene. Neoprene is a polychloroprene foam made from petroleum. We replace that with natural rubber foam. So pretty simple. Similar thing with, for example, spandex, which is also petroleum-based. We replace that with what we call elastic natural rubber filament. And so we're chasing DuPont, sort of.
I was going to say, what got you into this field? I mean, did you all of a sudden you're out there on the playground and going, I think I need to go into this?
None at all. No. So what got me in the field really was Jeff Martin, my husband, who's the founder of Yulex Corp. So Jeff started this business, over 20 years ago, really wanting to domesticate a natural rubber crop for the U.S. because natural rubber is actually seen as a national security kind of raw material that's critical. And it's ongoing. So it's something that basically, all the Western countries really want their own supply of natural rubber, not being dependent on Hevea brasiliensis, which is the rubber tree that is all based and grown in Southeast Asia. And so you can imagine the whole world is dependent on one region of the world for critical material. And so whether or not you're in Turkey, whether or not you're in Europe, or whether or not you're in the US, you really want your own natural rubber supply. So you're independent. You're not relying on another source for that. And so that's what he was doing with Wayuli, which is a desert shrub grown in Southeast regions, because it's very water tolerant. And when he licensed that technology to a third party, basically to work with Bridgestone, he licensed it to an energy company in Italy called ENI, and they are working with Bridgestone to commercialize production on a large scale of that Wayuli natural rubber. He then switched to sort of a consumer product and said, where can I make a difference here? What can I do? And so that's where it came in. And where we really, where we sort of got on the map was with Patagonia. And so developed natural rubber foam. And the collaborator for that was really Patagonia. So if you look at all the Patagonia wetsuits now, they're all made of Yulex natural rubber foam. And so that was really the seed of that. And that was back in like 2013, 2014. And so I don't know how much you know about me, but my background is really drugs. So we joke that I went from drugs to rubber. But so I spent, almost 2 decades doing biotech and pharma right here in San Diego for a biotech company called ViaCyte. So we were at the leading edge developing a cell therapy for type 1 diabetes, which was acquired by our competitor, Vertex Pharmaceuticals. And so when that was acquired, it was sort of a natural progression then was like, what do I do next? And I wanted a new challenge and Jeff needed help. So that's kind of how...
So how does the science of biomed tie into the science of rubber?
It's all research, right?
Gotcha.
I mean, it's still innovation, it's still entrepreneurship, it still requires IP resolutions. One of the major differences, of course, it's still a polymer, right? So it's a natural polymer. Mm-hmm. It's not from cells. So I'm used to working and helping scientists on sort of a business and intellectual property level. So this is much more hands-on. We moved, for example, in 2022 to 2024 completely, 100% to Vietnam to build an entire supply chain starting from the raw material, working with rubber smallholders, processors, manufacturers, and transferring technology for our foam and our filaments. And so building that entire supply chain from the ground up in Thailand and in Vietnam. And so that's very different than the biotech and sort of drug work that I did, and much more operational and surprisingly really complicated. So we always think of biotech and pharma as being very complicated because, the cellular organisms are complicated and drug development is complicated. But the textile industry and fashion and footwear, they're equally complicated in just different ways.
Right. We're chatting with Liz Bowie. She is the CEO of Yulex Brands Corporation. I'm Drew Schlosberg, listening to another edition of Drew Schlosberg Spotlight on the Community Show. We are the nation's longest running community podcast. In our 20th year, brought to you by Mission Fed Credit Union, 6 decades of doing great things in our region, food insecurity, Alzheimer's, arts, financial literacy, and so forth, joined by co-host, and he is the senior associate producer of many shows at Cloudcast Media. Brandon, you got any questions?
I'm honestly just lost. I've never really gone into material science, and so I have no idea what's... I understand the national security part of having our own source of natural rubber, not relying on another country, allowing us to be able to control it a little bit more and not be, at least, be easily manipulated to follow along with what's out there. And so what is stopping the rubber from actually being out there for more companies than just Patagonia? Like, is it just expensive? Is it hard to develop? You talked about the manufacturing operation side. That's like that's difficult.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And part of it is, remember that, we've had now almost, 50 years of dependency on petroleum products, right? So you have all the machinery, you have all the manufacturing, you have all the equipment dedicated to working with petroleum products. Everything, for example, from, one of the things that, for example, like chips. So when you recycle plastic bottles, they get made into basically plastic chips, right? So chips are easy, right? You bags of them, then you basically melt them and you make different things out of them. Natural rubber, you have to tap a tree, right? You make the latex, you have to purify that latex, in our case, to make Yulex Pure, and then you have to extrude that to make a filament. So it's a whole entirely different processes that are very different from the regular supply chain that currently exists. And so part of that adoption is brands are all about money, right? And petroleum, for many years was fairly low. Its commodity prices were good, and you get a lot of bang for your buck with a lot of plastics. And so they developed this whole supply chain and system where they could get everything for goods that were fairly cheap, right? A pair of shoes, may sell for $120, $150, but it probably costs less than $20 to make, right? And so in comes a new material, and there's adoption, there's development, and development is long. It's anywhere from 12 to really 24 months to incorporate a new material, do all the quality testing, do all the washes, run it through the whole thing. It can be quite complicated. And so there's just reluctance and resistance to that because, of course, that costs. And then you're asking, brands don't really own their own assets, right? They're partnering just like we are with manufacturing partners. So then you're asking that manufacturing partner to do that development. And oftentimes they don't want to do that development because they're having to stop their equipment, right, and their production line. So do I want to stop basically making millions of pairs of socks every month to basically test out a new filament? So you're coming across, there are certain barriers like that are just like, you're just pressing hands, making your case and hoping. So right now, for example, with Elastic, the filament that we're working with over 75 different manufacturers. I'm not saying all of them are successful, but we've had that communication, had that discussion. And all along the supply chain, people who make our filaments and spool them so they look like spandex, others who cover them for yarns so that people who can make knits and textiles and socks and elastics and denim can use them. And then you have the fabric producers who actually have to make those textiles. And then you have the finished goods. And that's what the brands deal with, is the finished goods. So that's a tier 1 producer, right? So think of all that has to be put in place before that brand can actually buy that finished good.
I can't help but think that with all of you basically just gave the strongest argument for like why I should never switch to this new rubber. What are how do you convince some of these manufacturers to move into and switch to? Because you've gotten you said it's 80?
75. Yeah.
75? That's a lot. That's a lot of people you managed to convince. Like what's the thing that's getting them to that aha moment, like this is it?
Right. So the aha moment is just really what I said, when I filled out the form, is microplastics.
Right.
Plastics, and just the fact that microplastics are everywhere, right? So there's an EU report that says that basically there's 8%, in the marine, there's 8% of like microplastics are found in the marine. That is equivalent to about 200 to 500,000 tons, right? And think of that. That's equivalent to about 2 to 3 large containers. Ships, cargo ships, those cargo ships that go across back and forth, each of those has I don't even know how many thousands of containers on them, but think of that, 2 to 3 of that of microplastics, right? And you're in school, UCSD, I mean, there's microplastics everywhere. And now it's increasingly microplastics in our food, right? In the packaging, in what we eat and what we drink, and also now in our bodies, right? I mean, so there was a recent study by UC Riverside that just came out that found basically microplastics in our arteries in mouse models. And right now there's no good way, there is no known method to undo that. How do you take that microplastic out of your body? That is unknown. But a huge part of that, let me just finish.
Sure, please.
The microplastics comes from textiles. So a large part of all the microplastics is all the clothing and the textiles we have. Every time you use it, every time you wash it, every time you manufacture it, all that debris, right, goes into the environment. And so textiles, which is, the industry we're in, because we're in the industry of basically replacing and making articles of clothing, footwear, shoes, bags, all this stuff, right? And so what we're trying to do is replace that sort of plastic addiction with a natural material. And I think brands now with sustainability, CO2 emission goals, Europe, for example, has, a carbon neutrality goal by 2050. So they're much more driven, much more regulated. So that's really, if you will, that's the message. That's the narrative, is the fact that it's better for the environment. And it's better for us.
Better for the body as well. When we come back from break, I know Brandon's got chomping at the bit to ask another question here. Chatting with Liz Bowie. She is the CEO of Yulex Brands Corp. Drew Schlosberg of Cloudcast Media. We're going to talk more about this very cool thing they're doing and where we are going with this, where the consumer can expect to see this, what we need to do as we move forward with this interesting technology. And Brandon knows I'm going to ask this question because I think I ask it at every single interview now. How has AI tied into any of this? Because obviously it's touching everything else. When we return with Liz Bowie after this short message.
When you do your banking with Mission Fed, you get great rates on auto and home loans. That's good for you, but something good also happens for a lot of other people. We're not for profit, so we put money back into the community to help lots of great nonprofits to keep San Diego strong. So you're not just getting something good, you're doing something good. Come to Mission Fed. It's banking that's good for all.
Brand amplification is the DNA of Cloudcast Media, and our code is the powerful blending of sound, voice, and storytelling to lift local brands and their communities. Whether it is our Brandcast, Schoolcast, or Causecast platforms, the unifying ethos is all about this community, the one you call home. If you dare to dream and want to explore the brand amplification of Cloudcast, a national leader in local podcasting and other Winfluence strategies, please visit us at cloudcast.us.
I'm Drew Schlosberg of Cloudcast Media, listening to another edition of Drew Schlosberg Spotlight on the Community Show. We are the nation's longest running community podcast in our 20th year, brought to you by Mission Fed Credit Union, 6 decades of doing great things in the community. Chatting with Liz Bowie, CEO of Yulex Brands Corp. Just talking about this fascinating aspect with rubber and plastics, and I didn't realize what's in my bloodstream. I'm going to have to sit there and ask my doctor about that. Joined by my colleague and a frequent co-host of our Spotlight show. He's the senior associate producer for Cloudcast Media, Brandon Joe. Brandon, you were ready to jump on another question.
I'm just curious because there's so much language about microplastics. It is a terrible thing, but I guess if I were a doubter, and I would ask something like along the lines of, so what? So what? Like there's so many microplastics. Like I'm not affected. Like I'm still walking around. I'm still eating fine. I'm sleeping fine.
Now you are.
What's the I guess the two questions that I have is like, at what point do we have a problem? Like do we start seeing like real problems in ourselves on our like daily life? And what's the scary thing about this stuff?
Okay, so I think, there's different trains of thought with that, because what you're saying is reactive. Is that at what point is enough, right? And just because you can breathe, you can do everything seems normal, is it
actually time?
Right.
I mean,
and so it's sort of like smoking, right? Think about that. So think of, especially here in the U.S. with the litigation with regards to tobacco smoking, people smoked for years. On a day-to-day basis, I didn't really have any issue. And then all of a sudden, you get cancer and there's an issue, right? So are we always just going to deal with problems when it's like basically it requires like...
Yeah, because humans are reactive by nature and not proactive.
I feel like the United States is a special offender of that particular topic too.
Right. But even like, for example, a smoker's lung, even someone who's smoked for a very long time can actually regain and sort of like, get back a really healthy lung in about 15 years. Right now, we don't really have a way of like taking the microplastic, right, that is lodged in our brains and our bloods and various different cells out. So that's right. So that just accumulates, right? And so the way, think of it as like plaque, right? I mean, I don't know if we can ultrasound our way out of, something like this. And so I think I don't think it's a good thing to always be so like, if it doesn't affect me now, and if it doesn't affect my life, and I can still have this healthy, good quality lifestyle, then why should I care? Because in the aggregate, I would say that it's already a problem, right? You already find it. So think of, you've seen it for many years now, all the animal life that gets trapped by plastic nets, right? Fishing nets, and just everything, right? It's clogging. So that's a macroplastic. Just think of what they're eating, right? And it's not them. You're eating it because they're eating it, right? So think of salmon that you catch. Think of salmon that you farm. Think of even, whatever seafood you eat. If they're ingesting it, that means you're ingesting it because you're ingesting them. So, it's, I know you're just asking that like, as to play sort of the devil's advocate, but I would say that it's like, it's almost already too late in a way. Mm-hmm. So I think, it definitely, I think it's an urgent matter.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about, if you can, some of the challenges, obviously, probably political challenges as well. And as you noted here, tariffs cannot be helping your world.
Oh, no, it's horrible. Actually, it's really devastating, the textile and sort of the industry in general. Even if something is made in the U.S., all the components, it can be assembled here, but everything else
comes somewhere else.
It comes from somewhere else, right? Yeah. Steel, fabrics, materials. we work with, for example, some U.S. mills, and then what do they say? Oh, our R&D is in China, right? So they're importing it. But now, even if their R&D is in China and they're producing that in China, just that import alone back into the U.S. to assemble it becomes cost prohibitive. So we've had a number of partners just basically stop development because of tariffs. And so it's it's harming the entire industry.
Right. So I want to get back to, the Yulex product, Ulastic, and all this business. You've obviously grown since Jeff has started this, to say the least. Are you looking at certain markets being more fruitful, so to speak, than others, or not really?
Obviously, textiles is a big market, right? So that's, and also I think of it as impact. In this age, because, it's money, but it's also just impact. Where can we make the most impact?
Right.
Footwear is huge, right? Think of how we even market footwear, right? In other words, you need new running shoes every year, right? Even if you don't run, right? And so what do those running shoes end up, right? They basically end up getting exported to Africa, Chile, to various other parts, which eventually ends up in a landfill anyway.
Right.
But they don't get recycled, right? Because it's very hard to recycle something that has so many different components and different textiles. Because people forget that only less than 2% of all textiles get really recycled. And it's very difficult to recycle a blended material with so many different types of raw materials in it, because you have to separate mechanically.
It'd be cost prohibitive, would it not be?
It's cost prohibitive.
Yeah,
and the energy consumption to do that is not, again, it's not a money-making thing. And so it's not going to get done. And most of recycling is not circular. You're not basically recycling your pants to make another pair of pants. It's downcycling. You're recycling that to make something that has lesser value, right? Like, for instance, pre-consumer waste for denim and fabrics is being turned into potential insulation, but it's not another pair of jeans. It's a different product that has lesser value.
Right.
And so recycling is not working. Right. And then also you got to consider that a lot of that waste, especially pre-consumer waste, is at the site of the manufacturer who's making it. And yet recycling centers are not in Southeast Asia or Asia, right? They're, in the Scandinavian countries, they're in the U.S.
Right. So if you were to wave the magic wand, you can control, right, exactly. It's your wand. What would you do? We'd say we'd probably do something with tariffs, right? But what else would you do? Say, now you have this wand. What's the very first step you would do?
I think I would just, a lot of education with regards to limiting consumption.
Okay.
That's, but that's hard, right? Because that's the consumers. And especially here in the U.S., where most of our services nowadays are legal services, financial services, are all, if you quote unquote, white collar type of jobs. And so consumerism is high, right? Amazon, Alibaba, that aspect of it is high. And so that's a difficult sort of push. But the other thing is, I think there is some regulations in California and elsewhere, which is sort of now, instead of putting it on the consumer, they're putting it on the brand and the producer. So producer responsibility laws, like one just passed here in California, basically saying if you're going to make, let's just say, 1 million of a certain article, you're responsible for what happens to those, that whole end of life. And so it's spreading the accountability all throughout the supply chain and not just to the consumer.
Right. And of course, the pushback would come from those folks who are producing that, because that adds a cost to their...
Absolutely.
Right. Even though it's good for us.
And that adds to the cost, of course, the good. And they're just going to always push it to the consumer.
Right.
But maybe that's okay, really, if you think about it, because consumers think about it, a pair of jeans now they're now cheaper than they were 20 years ago. And that's wrong. Right? Because that the cost of labor has gone up. So why is it that basically the same pair of denim is costing you less? Right.
No, exactly. So we're going to put your vision hat on. It's now, right, we already used your magic wand. It's 5 years from now. Where's Yulex?
I hope better adoption. For both our natural rubber foam to replace neoprene and Ulastic to replace spandex. Because if that were to happen, so it's kind of that would be wonderful, because Ulastic is biodegradable.
Right.
And we already have an industry capable of taking things that are biodegradable, such as, and so, that would be ideal if there was even, for example, 5 to 10% adoption of all the textiles that could use either the Yulex foam or the Ulastic. That would be That would be great.
So for our listeners who are fascinated by this, like most, like I am and Brandon was, how do they get a hold of you? They want to know more about what you're doing. What's the website? What's your email? If
Sure.
that's okay.
Oh, absolutely. So basically, they should just go on the website. Our website has a lot of information. And particularly under stories, we have written all sorts of blogs with regards to understanding natural rubber, why it's better, why you should go natural, why you should ditch, petroleum-based products. We have information on CO2 emissions. We have information on biodegradability. And so we have a lot of education resources on yulex.com, yulex.com. And if they need more information, they can certainly always just reach out to us on contact on info or reach out to me on LinkedIn. So we spend a lot of our time also just educating because we want, an educated consumer is just like an educated workforce, right?
It's the most important thing, and this is why we've been doing this show for 20 years, because you need to get the word out. You can't get it out once. We just had a friend of mine who runs her own PR firm, is that it used to be 7 times the message would get through to someone. It's up to 14 now. So you have to do that. You know that better than anybody. Well, it's nice seeing you.
Of course.
Good wishes for maybe not as rainy as Seattle this year. Who knows? Good luck on that one. And we know we'd love to have you back on. You always got some interesting things to say, and especially maybe here's what has transpired with Yulex ever since the last time you were on. How's that sound?
Yep, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I'm wishing everyone a happy Thanksgiving.
And likewise to you and your family as well. Liz Bowie, CEO of Yulex Brands Corporation. I'm Drew Schlosberg. You're listening to another edition of Drew Schlosberg's Spotlight on the Community Show, nation's longest running community podcast in our 20th year, brought to you by amazing folks at Mission Fed Credit Union. 60 years of doing great things for people living in San Diego County. And to our audience, we hope you enjoyed the interview.
You've been listening to an episode of Drew Schlosberg's Spotlight on the Community Show, amplifying the voices of social impact organizations, entrepreneurs, local nonprofits, and other community champions who shape the culture, creativity, and connectivity of San Diego community. Brought to you by Mission Fed Credit Union, bringing good things to San Diego for over 60 years. Learn more about what is good for you and good for all by visiting www.missionfed.com.
Cloudcast Media.